Nice background. Nice background.
For sure. That's in your honor. You've been waving the WFL flag over at the FDF page. So worth reminding us of those folks.
I went to a Bell game. So it's like we got free tickets. It was part of that whole Papergate scandal. My dad got free tickets from some guy. So we went down and watched the game. It was fairly entertaining, but like the next week, it's like, oh yeah, they reported 62,000 fans, and there were a ton of people there. There were 60-some thousand people in JFK Stadium, but turns out they only sold about 3,600 tickets.
Right. Well, you're
for free.
Fledgling league. Yeah, I think you had posted about that, and I think I found a New York Times article on that. Brief mention of, they're just kind of a bunch of kids running around, maybe watching the game, maybe not, maybe doing some other things,
Yeah.
So what was it about the World Football League? Well, first of all, let's set the stage here. Brien Martin is a longtime gamer. He's been very active on the Fast Drive football page, he created a kind of an unofficial World Football League set and is doing a replay. You're thinking of doing a 60 AFL, NFL, complete with the Super Bowl. You're talking about a fictitious living league as well. And so, Brien Martin, how long have you been gaming?
I can actually tell you the first time I ever played a sports game was 1972. And it was just after my birthday, had like $5 that I got in an envelope, and my mom and I were at Woolworths, and I saw this game, a little tiny box, very small box, about 2 feet long, said manage your own baseball team. And I read the description on the box, and I said, I got to have it. It was $2, and that meant I got change off my $5 bill and brought it home. And basically what that game was, for people who've never heard of it, it was a very generic baseball game. It had a deck of cards. It might have been 25 cards, 30 cards. And on each card was 9 readings, one for each fielding position. So you'd shuffle the deck, you'd set your lineup, and if the shortstop was up, you'd flip the first card and you'd read the shortstop reading. And whatever that was, you did. And it came with these little cardboard chips that you could move up and down the lineup. So it was almost like having a working scoreboard. And I love that game. I played it so much, I wore the cards out. And was able to find, by the time the cards were up, they had a deck of cards without the board game. I bought that and I wore those out. So that was my first foray into playing a sports game. I played that thing over and over again. Eventually, at some point, I don't know, maybe a couple of years after I owned it, I actually got a piece of paper out and put all the things on and started writing what were on all the cards as a way to figure out who's the best hitter. Like, I've been playing this game forever, and I hadn't really noticed patterns. And then it's like, oh, now I see how the game is built. And that really didn't trigger anything in the 11 or 12-year-old until I got Shurco in 1980. That was my first commercial game, and I've been playing that ever since. Matter of fact, I actually am the publisher of Shurco. Through my game designs that I've done, I then reconnected with Steve LeShay, who brought the game back. We actually created a second version of the game that's a little more granular. But yeah, Shurco was my first commercial foray into gaming. And I've played APBA, I've played almost all the baseball simulations you can replay, Diamond Mines, Status Pro, SI, football, pretty much second season Express. Used to have an old, my dad and I used to play Federal Electric football. If you remember that one. I've played NFL strategy with the little spring-loaded thing with the plastic plays that would overlay. I've played a lot of different games. One of the sports I probably don't play all for good reason is basketball. It just takes too long to play a basketball game. So fast forwarding through, designed a few games of my own, an indoor soccer game, an indoor football game, curling game, working with ASG Games. They sell my designs, and Shurco's been taking up most of my time. We redesigned everything from the jump. We had to go back and reduce. They never did season sets. They only ever did 2. We've gone back and done every single season since 1940.
Wow.
So there's the tinkering part. It's the mechanics of learning how things work and breaking a game down and seeing how it works under the hood. And that just sort of all stemmed back from that first time I wrote all those things out on all those cards. But I didn't realize at the time that that was sort of my way of saying, gee, I wonder how this works. So that's what I do when I get a new game is I usually just sit down and read the rules and then look at, okay, this result is this, except when it's that, how often does that appear? And you start just playing around with stuff. So that's how I got to the tinkering part. And I do it with every game I've ever run.
Sure. Well, that's the fun part. What do you find the most tinkerable, if we'll invent a word here, games?
Most tinkerable of the ones that I've designed?
Designed or played?
Of the ones I've designed, they're more, they deal more with team concepts where there's a team card. You can't really design your own. You have to have the formulas for it. And I didn't do that because I didn't want people tinkering with it. I did it just because that's the way my brain works for doing things. It's like, if I want to make it simple and easy to play, I have to sort of condense it down. There's that micro level where, would be the ultra micro level would be a pitch by pitch baseball game. Then you got the micro level, which would be an at bat by an at bat, and then you have the macro level. For the games I design, I look more macro level. You're the spectator, you're the fan in the stands watching the play unfold. Not a whole lot of detail in terms of things you can decide, but there are decision points. But mainly you're just taking the ratings and trying to play a season or an event or a tournament and come up with realistic results and feel like you're watching Steve Jungle play again for the New York Arrows. Pretty much that. I leave the more detailed, at bat by at bat games where there's decision points to others. There's a ton of baseball games. We don't need another baseball game. I've had one in the works for years. And once I got involved with Shurco, I set it aside. It's kind of like, everybody's done it. There's really no new way to do things. But of the games that I own, I think all of them can be tinkered with because there's usually some abstraction involved in game design. Well, I can't do X. I'll give you an example from Fast Drive Football. And again, Al made a design choice. He went through in his head and said, this is what I want. And as Keith has often said, and as Al said in his video, you design the game you want to play and you hope other people like it. And I'm the same way when I do mine. But he knows going in, as I do, as anybody else does, Keith does, there are elements in the game that are not perfect. History Maker Baseball, for example, very few outfield assists, very few, very, very few. But the game, people who play the game don't care because the other elements make up for it. So in Fast Drive Football, you have the field goal attempt, which is just a generic attempt, and Al made a design choice. I can have all these different things and I can have a subroutine that figures out the distance and all that other stuff. And he said, no, if the average field goal is 64% for this team, then every time they kick a field goal, they have a 64% chance. And mathematically, you get the same results. You get the same outcomes. You just won't know the distance. So when I was looking at it, it's like, well, okay, Al didn't do it that way. Let's see if I could come up with a way for people who want that, knowing that there will always be people who want that, right? There's somebody that came up with yardage and finder columns already. Like there's people who've done some other things to fill in the gaps that Al chose to stay away from. And so that was the thing I did with the field goals was, okay, I've got the data. We know where every field goal was kicked from. So now we just figure out, okay, every time you get a field goal attempt, you know what the different ranges are. So you know how often it happened, roll to see which one you got. And then each one has its own unique finder column for what the success rate is. And then you'll still get your 64%. You'll just get it in a different way. And you can then say, oh, I had a 36-yard field goal or whatever the person wrote down. So that's just one thing. And you always have to be careful. It's really It's something I don't think I've ever done, and I've really tried not to. You never want to portray your modification as better than what's out there. Always different. Sometimes you say not better, not worse, just different. Because you don't want to tell the designer that you think they're wrong. And Al made a perfectly great choice to abstract it in that way and keep it real simple. It's the rest of us knuckleheads that want detail that start creating problems for a game like that, because like, well, I want to do this and I want to have that, and some guys want to put yardage in and they want to know what yard line it was on, and they can do that. You have to be careful not to go, well, by the way, my idea is so good, Al, you should put it in your game, because then it's not his game anymore. Now, if he comes to any of us and says, hey, I'd like to add that in, would that be okay? I wouldn't have a problem with that, but I don't think he's ever going to do that, because then it's not his game. And that's what you have to be careful of when you tinker, is make sure that people understand you're not saying that you're doing it better. You're filling in a gap. You're doing something different. I created an alternate putting chart for History Maker Golf that took into account whether a golfer was hot or cold when he putted, and the results that are what I call on the borderline, like at the edge of where the two ranges meet. I just said, well, if he's hot, he'll make the first couple that he would miss. And if he's cold, he's going to miss the first couple that he would make. And so it's just an alternate putting chart. I posted it. There was some feedback on it. Some people thought it was a good idea. Some people said, oh, it's too much complication. It's the risk you take when you throw your ideas out there. But that's okay. You know, Alexander Graham Bell failed 3 times the telephone before he finally got it right. You know, you either keep going or give up.
Right, exactly. And that ability, I mean, certainly in Apple world, Ray Dunlop has superimposed a matchup system. We've got tons of folks. You know, there's an echelon of about 24 folks who really, you know, add, whether it's weather effects, redo the results boards, defense calling, blah, blah, blah. You know, I haven't played Strato. You know, I guess, you know, obviously some games are fully formed. I'm glad you said that, you know, it's kind of you do want to be the spectator to whatever level of specificity or granularity you want. You really are kind of ultimately, even if you are making some decisions at certain points, I mean, you're still awaiting a result. I mean, obviously it's you know, but I'm glad you said that. It's really kind of a wanting to recreate this entire environment in your, you know, little tabletop world, you know, not just, I guess, like try to pretend you're actually the athlete. I mean, that's although there are some games, I guess, that would tackle that too. You mentioned curling as one of your creations. So how did you dive into that game and, you know, find your point from, you know, kind of the narrow overview to the real broad play-by-play or moment by moment of that activity?
There's a free game on the Tabletop Sports website done by Ron Arnst and Mike Owens called T-Line Curling. And I played that a few times and I thought, I like it, it's good, but maybe I could do something different. Again, not better, just different. And so I looked at it and said, you know what, I think what's important here is that there's, and I really got in the fever after the 2006 Winter Olympics when the United States won the bronze with, I can't even remember, Pete Felton or whatever his name, I can't remember his last name. But that group of guys that went to the bronze medal game and won the bronze medal. I watched more curling than I ever watched before. I'd never really seen the sport. I just played the tabletop version and enjoyed it. And it dawned on me that almost every end, there's a shot. Sometimes it's early on in the end. Sometimes it's the last shot that is the key shot. That if that shot is made or missed, determines the outcome of everything. So I started looking at scores, and there's a Canadian Curling Association website that has archived results from thousands of matches. So I downloaded a whole bunch of scores and I started looking at, you know, the blank ends and how many points are scored in an end on average, and then I looked at it and said, well, how can I figure out how a single shot could do this. I didn't want to do a shot by shot game. So what I decided was each of the 4 players has a shot rating that's given to them over the course of the tournament. And I went, that's it. I've got it. I make a determination which of the 4 guys is in what it's called the influencer. Which one of the 4 guys is the influencer on this end? And then he's left with a shot. And if he makes it, it leads to this score. And if he misses it, it could lead to a steal. And so once I started to do that and play tested it, it became really easy to do. And it really, you can rate the players yourself. You don't need a formula. If you have the percentages, you can rate any player, any team, anywhere in the world. But it's pretty simplistic. Ron and I started working on kind of an outline of expanding that, where and we kind of got away from it, and we may return to it, but where you start at 0 and you actually do make all 8 shots, and each shot slides one way or the other. And at the end, depending on what you do, each shot slides it in a different direction. So if, as the attacking team, I make a mistake, well, now the thing slides 1 to my opponent. And if they make a good shot, now it slides 2 to the opponent. Now I have to make 2 really good shots to get it to come back. And it would be it'd be like just a sliding scale of just kind of keeping things on a balance and making decisions where you might want to blank the end. So there would be different rules to do that. So it's just one begat the other. So it was just figuring out what's the key takeaway. How do you want to do this? And so I just decided, okay, we'll decide which guy or girl, because I've rated women's teams as well, which position is going to influence this. And if they pass, they may score points. And if they fail, the risk of losing points and losing points with the hammer, and that's not good.
So let's run through, I guess, try this. Run through, I'm curious, the basic, your meat and potatoes sports, football, baseball. You said you won't do basketball, soccer maybe, hockey. Saddle racing has been kind of not necessarily a staple, but out there, boxing games. To the extent that you've got experience with all those, from the play-by-play to the drive-by-drive in football to any of the other, broad view or narrow view versions of all those sport games, what in each of those sports are you kind of focusing on as a gamer? For say a football game, would you be focusing on the ability to manipulate the defense and have the defense have a bigger outcome, or maybe more of a the style of offense, a run heavy versus pass heavy, things like that? In baseball, for pitching or fielding, primacy in given teams. I'm just curious what you look for in each of the kind of major sports games to make it the most optimal and enjoyable simulation.
For baseball, to me, it all comes down to the batter pitcher interaction. You've heard the term 50-50, which is pretty much the stratomatic view of, the card the result falls either on this card or that card. Now, there's lots of people that love that. There's lots of people that don't like it. But it's important to get that aspect right, because if you get that right, everything else then flows from that. If you have the pitcher being too strong, the batter too strong, then you wind up with pitchers that should have a 1.47 ERA with a 3.25. And that can happen. But I'm talking about over a long season, 162 games, that guy should be somewhere within, quarter to half a point on either side of the ERA that he had. So getting that balance right is important. And handling outliers. You're talking about dice games, and you can say, well, just roll more dice. Roll 3 10-sided dice, and you'll get the granularity that allows the Dennis Eckersley season to happen. Yes, you can. But it now also means that you have to have very, very detailed cards, which means that if you're calculating cards, you need to either write a really good program to do all of that math for you and it has to be flawless and that it creates each card perfectly, or you have to manually do every card. 600 cards done by hand is not something that anybody really wants to do. So you have to be very careful of that. Football, what I'm looking for is a game whereby substitutions don't dramatically affect your ability to move forward. I've played APBA football. Okay, I want to pull the linebacker and put in a pass rusher. I had to recompute all of my rankings and ratings. Now you can probably do that ahead of time, especially if you play with a pretty standard idea. But it also means you have to think, if you're doing a season replay, you have to think through 32 teams. What will my defensive and offensive substitutions look like at any point in time in the game, and what will that index number be, and be able to plug and play. Now, some guys do go through all that. That just seems like it's a little excessive. That's what I like about second season, in that all the players are rated, they're on the sheet. The guys that are supposed to be in for pass are shaded, and I think they're in red, and the guys that are in for the run are green. I usually get that backwards. So if you know it's a pass play, boom, you're good to go. Just glance down, there's the guy. It's him and him alone. And if he's a good player, he stops the play. If he's a bad player, the play goes for a big gain. That to me is the epitome of the substitutions can happen without thinking about it, because they're already listed on the sheet. When I've done my own second season leagues, I've preset normal offense, ball control offense, passing offense. So I pretty much keep the linemen the same, and then just change the different player positions, and that's who's in the game for that formation. On defense, I'll have a standard defense, I'll have a goal line defense, a short yardage defense, and a pass prevent defense. And again, I'll pre-substitute that, but they're in 3 different columns. So I just look at the right column and go, okay, the cornerback is this guy and he's a 2. Okay, that's a deflection. So that's the key thing in football, is a substitution system that doesn't take forever for you to get through it, to get to the next play. Because otherwise you just sit there and go, you know what, I'll put my 11 guys and it's Iron Man football, no substitutions, let's just play. That's my biggest thing. Because the other averages do tend to, you can get a running back's average pretty good, even on a base 36 like APBA, because of the 0 columns and special events and all that sort of stuff. Basketball, the toughest thing about basketball is the substitutions, the endless substitutions that you have to have, and mainly the ones due to foul trouble, mainly the ones due to fatigue. Football games don't have fatigue ratings generally, just because it would be a nightmare to keep track of all that. Baseball, you only have to worry about pitchers. But basketball, every player is going to get tired. Every player needs to take a rest. Every player, and when do you do that rotation? And knowing the rotation. I played replay basketball, and their first set was an all-timer set. And one of the teams that they played was when they put in the set was the 82-83 Sixers that won with Moses' famous faux prediction. I knew how to play that team. I knew exactly how to play that team. Mark Ivoroni was the starting power forward, but he came out like 3 minutes in the game and they put Reggie Johnson in and rotated Ivoroni over to small forward. And I knew the substitution pattern. And I don't think in any of the co-op games that I played that I had my own Sixers, I don't think I lost a single game, because I knew how to manage that team. But if you don't know how to manage a team, knowing which guys should come in and who they get replaced for and what the rotation normally is, you would say, well, does it matter on a tabletop? Yes and no. If you want it to be realistic, you don't want to say, well, Dennis Johnson comes out of the game for 6 minutes every half, and it's the middle 6 minutes of the first half. If that's not what he did, if Lenny Wilkins kept bringing him out at 2 minutes at the end of the first quarter and the first minute of the third quarter, and then for a 2-minute stretch in the middle of the second quarter, like, if you don't know that, then it's not realistic, and you wind up overusing guys or underusing them. The 74 ABA set, there's a guy on the San Diego Conquistadors that just launched triples you wouldn't believe. His fatigue rating was low, but if you look at how many games he actually played, he didn't play very many, but it's easy to overuse him. and he can just bomb away from the outside. You just put him in there, put him at point guard, and it's so basketball is the substitutions and how it all fits together. And I played a game. I just finished a game of APBA basketball.
Wait, well, that's that's never happened before.
That I started in 1981. I started in 1981. That was a nightmare, worse than football, because every substitution, it was the rebounding, the assist, indices all had to be recalculated. It was just crazy. It was the worst game I've ever played in my life. I think I made it through halfway through the first quarter, and it was like, it's the only game that I bought, learned the rules, got the cards out, sat down, played a quarter, realized I was never going to play again, and threw it out. Like, I owned it for literally less than a week. Seriously.
The legacy of that basketball.
It was that bad.
Oh my goodness.
Hockey, excuse me. Hockey is one of those, again, line changes. When I invented between the boards indoor soccer, the beauty of that was there weren't lines. The players would come on and off the field as needed. So Steve Shurco would come to the bench for 15 seconds and go right back out, or he'd play for 4 minutes in a row. Like, there was no line changes. So you could do a team card that says, I'm not going to worry about line changes. I'm going to identify who the shooter is on each shot, and it could be Shurco 9 times in a row. He could have been off the field at some point during those 9 shots in a row. We just don't talk about it. We don't show it. Hockey, though, those line changes are super important. There are people who know their hockey very well, and they are not going to play, the LCD line for the Flyers, and have somebody else be on right wing instead of Reggie Leach. They're not going to do it. So those are really important to have. And that usually requires a little research. If the game owner hasn't provided you with the lines in the game, then you have to go and you have to either know it or go get it, because otherwise you don't get the production line. You don't get the French connection unless you know about it. And those are important, and they have to happen about every minute, give or take. So it's just trying to find out, hockey blasts with all the mats and stuff where you can lay all the cards out at one time and move markers around. It's probably the best way I've ever seen it. But Stratomatic, it's flipping cards around, it's shuffling cards. Okay, my left defenseman's now in. Oh, the power play team's on. It can be frustrating, and I've thought about designing a game. Actually, it's been on the design table for like 12 years, Fire on Ice, which would be an offshoot of Between the Boards, where the line changes are going to happen without you knowing it. And when a guy scores, their line was on the ice. And I make it that simple. But I just haven't been able to work out the math the way I want it to get that to work. And I've had a gazillion other things with grad school. I've changed jobs. And there's always, daughter went to college. There's always things that are going on where you just get sidetracked. But hopefully if I revisit that someday, and right now I'm working on a bowling game. So
interesting. A bowling game, personal player cards, and efficiency.
Yeah. Individual player cards and actual, it's sort of an offshoot of the APBA bowling, where you actually have the option. If you get a 9 count, you can just go to the generic 9 count spare and shoot it. Or you can go on another chart and say, which pin did I leave? Roll for that, and then roll for the spare. And each spare has its own conversion percentage based on actual data analysis that was done. There's a Vanity Fair or Slate magazine did an article maybe about 5 years ago called "Which is the hardest spare to make?" and found that it's not the 710, it's the 5-pin Greek church. Has like a 0.1% chance of conversion. And the guy had analyzed 400,000 frames of bowling from the PBA.com website and broke it down. And there's a little applet on there that you can click on the individual pins and find out what the conversion percentage is for that spare. So I actually sat with that application and started and clicked on the 1 pin and wrote down how many were made and how many were left. Then I clicked that one off and clicked on the 2-pin. I went through every single potential spare combination, up to 5. And then I just designed a bowling game around that.
Nice, nice. I know a lot of folks really would like to see the APBA bowling game back. It can be hard to find. It's kind of fun, but some might decry it as the dreaded dice rolling exercise. But as you said, you kind of want to be a spectator. So isn't essentially, I mean, it's all dice rolling, again, to the extent that you're making meaningful decisions as either in solo or face to face, which is a whole other animal. But isn't that kind of I guess, how do you avoid that sense, that feeling that maybe it's just like roll and mark and make it that it's there's some excitement in there? I mean, or do you really need to be a fan of the game and or the players and or the era, World Football League, to really want to go through that entire project?
I think that there are, and I've seen this on the Play website, there are people who are auto racing, who are red, white, and blue racing fans that are not NASCAR fans. They just enjoy a racing game, and maybe they enjoy the concept. They just don't like watching it. I have to admit, when I was younger, we would watch NASCAR racing, but we were watching for the agony of defeat because there always seemed to be some massive wreck once a week because the cars were not as good, the drivers were not as good. And so other than that, it's left turn, left turn, left turn, left turn. That's not to disparage fans of NASCAR or sport. It's just that to someone like me, that isn't as exciting, especially nowadays, simply because the cars are all the same. They're all designed the same, just different manufacturers, but they all have the same specifications. They're all restricted in the same way. Drivers have some element of they can make a difference, but most of the time, if you listen to the announcers on a NASCAR race, they always keep talking about, he's got a great car out there today, he's just driving a great car. So it's like, okay, if it's the car, then the drivers don't even mean anything either. So I've been working on an F1 variant for red, white, and blue racing. That is really that one is a tough one to crack because people who like NASCAR like the idea they can do all sorts of multiple passing. F1 doesn't have much passing. If you look at a grid for an F1 race, you may find the leader is in the leader from the pole position straight through. At the end of every lap, it's the same guy in front. He may fall behind briefly on a lap, but at the end of every lap, it's like Lewis Hamilton was the leader of the entire race. It's strategy and behind. So we're getting real close to cracking that nut of what's the important element. And we've decided it really focuses around the tires and managing your tires, and that the tires allow different things to happen on the race course for different drivers. So if you choose to run on yellows, you're going to be penalized if the track is heavy for red. You choose to run yellows on a red track, but if you don't run the reds, especially near the end of the race, you're probably going to be eased out on a lot of opportunities because you're not on red tires. So it just becomes a matter of the player then is a spectator, but also has to make decisions for 20 different drivers as to how that's going to look when they're going to pit. And so you get those sorts of things going on, but it's just, I think that there's just a lot of stuff out there that's just waiting to be picked on, and just folks are waiting to do it somewhere.
Would pit efficiency
away from the original question? So
that's the would pit sticking to the racing. I speaking of time, I finally got to at least taking apart the racer cards for red, white, and blue racing. So inching ever closer to playing a game there. Would pit efficiency or fuel consumption and fuel management play into your F1 as well, or NASCAR, I guess? Or do you not deem that?
It does. In 2011 or 2012, and there's 2012, Formula One, FIA, which is the International Racing Union for the Formula Series, decreed that all vehicles needed to be outfitted with gas tanks large enough to put the entire fuel supply for a 305-kilometer race on the car. They were afraid of, and my understanding is, I haven't really researched it. My understanding is there was a Formula 3 race somewhere where somehow the gasoline got sparked by going up against an engine, or it ran under something that was hot, and the flames just shot back up the canister, and the canister exploded. They got the pit crew was able to see that before it went off, and so just some minor injuries. But Formula One's like, you know what, this is crazy. These are open wheeled racers, and if a canister explodes, the driver could get hit by shrapnel from behind and get killed. So now each of the racers has enough fuel to go the 305 kilometers without being refueled. Where that comes into play is, it also means that since you have all the fuel you're ever going to have, and you must have in your tank at least 1 full liter of fuel at the end of the race, so they can take a sample to make sure that you didn't put additives in the fuel, you have all of your fuel minus 1 liter that you can use. So you have to be very careful about how fast you go and for how long. So in our game, our variant, you'll always be allowed to pass 1 car. If you hit the qualities and you have the right tires on your car, you'll always be able to pass the car ahead of you. If you win that challenge, you can try to challenge another car and go 2. If you do, you have to put we're calling them chips, but people have to provide their own markers, but we're calling it a fuel use chip. You put that on the driver. At the end of the race, you take that chip and multiply it by 3, however many you have to multiply by 3, and add it to a 2 D10 roll. If you exceed 100 after adding the modifiers, you've run out of gas. And then you drop the number of final places from where you are now by the difference between what you rolled and 100. So if I've got 4 chips on my car, that's 12 points, and I roll a 96, and I have 108. Oh, I'm out of gas. And now I fall 8 places from where I was at. So if I'm in the lead, now I'm going to finish 9th because I ran out of gas early enough in the lap that I was able to cross the finish line, but 8 people passed me before I could do that. So we're going to have that. Now, when you go to older seasons where there are refueling things, we'll have to look at whether we're going to, if you stop for a pit, you can remove like a die roll worth of chips or something like that. Or you get to remove 2 or something crazy. But yeah, those are interesting design elements, because you want to make it that the players can make choices and they have to think through, okay, I'm going to pass another car here. That's another chip. Now I'm at plus 12 on my dice roll. Man, am I pushing it too far? It's 88% chance. I think I'm good. I think I'll pass an 88% chance. And then you roll an 89. And you run out with 1. But I think that's where the strategy comes in. If you make a bad move, you pay for it. You may pay for it at the end, and it's all random, but it's just as random as being on the track. You ran rich for 1.5 kilometers too long, and you come up 5 ounces short on your gas. And that's a 1/4 kilometer away, and you roll across the finish line as everybody else like flying past you at 190 miles an hour.
It's interesting that brings to mind, we talked about, talking about sports today versus sports then. And I think and you had given us an assessment of a fast drive football and talked about, the era of 74. This has been talked about a lot of late, it seems like maybe it's just all the interviews I'm doing, but talking about professional efficiency, whether it's, there's just not as much left to chance in any pro sport these days. It's not the quarterback calling the play like Bradshaw or Stabler. It's, more like Landry Ball. You've got 10 coaches or 10, race managers, or everyone's a manager of some aspect of the car, the fuel cap manager or whatever. It's kind of, being able to do what you do and give people an experience maybe lets them kind of experience things before they got so hyper pro. Does that kind of make sense?
I think so. I think it's, we all, as game players, I think we like to do two things. We remember the APBA ad that says, "You be the manager," and thinking, oh yeah, if I were the manager of the 1980 Phillies, what would my lineup be? What would I do with those guys? And it turns out that what I would do with those guys is exactly what Dallas Green did with those guys in the last half of the season, which is Lonnie Smith batted leadoff, Bake McBride batted third, and Schmitty batted fourth, and you play with that because it's A, you're familiar with it, and B, it was a lineup that worked. So if it worked in real life, it should work on the tabletop. And I think that's the way most people play, is they try to run with lineups that they're most familiar with. Although there will be times when a Tigers fan will go, Ray Oyler, no, not today, thank you, and put in someone else. But for the most part, we want the games to feel like the games we remember watching. And we want teams to be like what we remember watching. One of the first experiences I had with the draft league was in college back in the early 80s. And we had the 1980 APBA set, and we drafted teams. And I drafted Dan Graham, who's backup catcher for the Orioles. Dan Graham's card was 5-5. Dan Graham was my cleanup hitter for my club. And Dan Graham hit like 35 homers in a 65-game season. Like, completely unrealistic. Dan Graham wouldn't come close to getting playing time. But he had a 5.51, so he's my cleanup hitter. That year was the year that Enrique Romo hit a grand slam, if you remember, for the Pirates. And he had a 1 at 11 and 66. So guys were bringing him on the team to be their designated hitter. Al Holland hit a triple. He had 2s all over his card. That guy got traded before every series so that he could be like a pinch hitter and hit triples like crazy. So where the cards fail us, we still like to come back in and say, whoa, that's nuts. Dan Graham should not be the cleanup hitter for the 1980 Baltimore Orioles at all, ever. And so I think that's what we try to do, is we try to play it the way we remember it. But then where you be the manager is when we go, you know what, why am I continuing to play Larry Bowa at shortstop? I've got a guy on the bench that is better than him. I'm gonna play him more often. Probably overusing the card, but you're trying to fix the things that you would have fixed if you could. I'm sure there's lots of players out there that are playing current football seasons that are like, you know what, you got so-and-so in the backfield. I'm running. I'm not going to play this, throw the ball. Bears fans, saying we have the great running back, Jordan Howard, and Trubisky comes along and all of a sudden we don't run the football. Bears fans with Jordan Howard are running the football because they're fixing what was broken. And I think that's what we all want, is to be able to fix the things that we wish we could fix if we were in charge. But for the most part, we'd like to keep it as close to the vest as possible. So when you're designing a game, you want to do the same thing. You want to make sure that people have the ability to make those decisions when they can. And you also want to make it clear to them, you realize this guy had 3 at-bats all season. So in Shurco, he's a AAA, 34, 35, he's going to hit a lot of home runs, but he's had 3 at-bats. So understand, you can misuse him if you want to, but you're really only messing up your own experience. But your game, your rules.
Right. That brings up several questions. The usual, the solo versus face-to-face experience, what the context of what you're playing is, whether you're trying to do a statistically accurate replay, or you're trying to actually beat somebody, or be better than the original team. Do you institute quotas? A lot of APBA football folks, I mean, if you substitute folks in on occasion, you kind of allocate, they try to allocate the trick play. You can't be using a wide receiver game like, I had a couple of 10 or 15 yard end runs and use him every other play, that kind of stuff. And then the idea of historical realism versus, what you can meaningfully achieve. So that's three things. Quotas, face-to-face, but also because the last thing tying into what you've done, I had mentioned in my interview with Al Wilson, Fast Drive Football, that it was done. It was like, could you really take the $14? Everyone wants to play the $76, or in my 79's Niners were 2-14 with Montana on the bench. I mean, his card, if you're going to card it, is not going to be a great card. But do you think I think you do think that there's a meaningful way to kind of, maybe not with real teams, I think you're doing kind of a fictitious league, but a league that can have, performance improvement or not over time. You're kind of creating a new world where a team can kind of maybe build on its abilities, if I'm correct there.
If we're talking about playing any game, you name the game, and you're playing the 1980 season, or it's baseball, you want those teams that were at the top to rise to the top. Because dice are involved, it means that the Philadelphia Eagles, who went 12-4 that year, went to the Super Bowl, lost to the Raiders, from the Philly area, in case it wasn't apparent. You want them to be 12-4, 11-5, maybe 10-6 would be okay, because of course they played a couple of teams. They played Dallas twice that year, or 13-3 wouldn't be bad. What you don't want is you don't want the Eagles to be 4-12. You hope the cards are good enough. You hope that the stats are good enough. You hope that the subjective ratings have been bumped up so that they can finish that way. The $76. I think any game from any manufacturer, whether it's a free game or you pay for it or whatever, any game that intentionally designs an 0-14 team that cannot win no matter what you do is not a game I want. And the reason I say that is, if it's going to replicate that, it means it's going to replicate everything exactly for everybody else. And if that's the case, why am I bother playing the games? There's no point, right? I want to be able to say, I want to take the 1980 Eagles and march them through their 16-game season, making all the play call decisions myself. And that's where it gets interesting in football, right? When you're making the play calling decisions yourself, you're altering history. If you remember that season, Ron Jaworski passed for like 3,500 yards. Wilbert Montgomery had 1,400 yards rushing. They were a very balanced team. But for some strange reason in the Super Bowl, Dick Vermeil decided to throw the ball everywhere. And Jaworski got picked off 3 times. So in my world, it'd be like, what would that be if the Eagles ran a balanced offense the same way they did during the regular season? But it also means that I kind of have to run a balanced offense with the Eagles during the regular season to try to replicate their totals. If I go to a pass-heavy offense for a team that was balanced, the Eagles will probably lose 6 or 7 games and maybe not even make the playoffs. The Bucs, on the other hand, in 76, if you could replay them as the coach, what would you do differently? Who do you have that was underutilized? Who do you have that was overutilized? Did they run too much? Should they have passed more? By being able to make those decisions yourself, you might be able to and should be able to pick up a win or two. In fast drive football, you should be able to have the dice pop up that the Buccaneers beat the Pittsburgh Steelers once every 1,000 times, because that's always possible. It's that any given Sunday thing. I think Al actually used it in your interview, the words any given Sunday. And I think that's the important part for game designers is you need to make it realistic. You need to make sure that the bad teams are bad and the good teams are good. but you also need to make it that it's not so etched in stone that it becomes that dice rolling exercise that you were talking about. Oh, rolling a dice, Bucks can't lose, can't win. Okay, how badly did they get beat? Oh, they got beat by 37. Okay, so just write standings and put the 0-14 right off the get-go, and then just roll. That doesn't sound like a fun experience for you, for me, or for people who are buying the game. Even a free game, Al may or may not realize this, because I think this is his first official design, like, of his own. When you have people coming out the first week, and take my comments out of it, take anything I said out of it, all the other people that don't have design experience, who are just game players, they don't look under the hood, they don't tinker. When you have that many people coming out saying what a fantastic game it is, you have really done something. And I hope he realizes that. I think he does, but it's when it's the first time, it feels good. And then it's like, wow, I really knocked that out of the park. My advice is be careful if you go for number 2, because the second time replicating that same feeling and that same level of perfection is hard, because you have to live up to number 1. So I wish him all the best if he's thinking of doing anything for baseball or basketball or some other sport. But yeah, it's the comments that I've seen, it's a hit. It is an absolute hit right off the get-go. And I've been playing a ton of it. I'm like I posted yesterday, I'm creating a fictional league that I'll be actually. Keith, I think when he does baseball American, football American sets, he looks at the players and goes, okay, this guy's going to retire and this guy's going to retire. And he has some sort of spreadsheet of all that, and he makes the rating changes. He's not playing the entire football America season and re-rating the teams. I'm going to be playing the season and re-rating the teams based on what they did. So this year's, Philadelphia Freedom might look okay, and next year they might look fantastic, or they might look awful, depending on how the season goes. And that gives people a chance to play along if they want to, or not, whatever they see fit. But yeah, I think most people do it solo. Face-to-face is fun, but I don't get to do that much, so I'm just creating my own universes and stuff. But yeah, it's I think it's important for us to remember we all, as I've said a couple of times, we all want to control the game and try to do something that the original guys didn't do, if we can.
There's got to be a realistic. I mean, I did the $76. I mean, everyone kind of wants to do that, just to see how many wins you can get, right? For the 80, I want to replay the 80 Steelers just to see if maybe you could sneak, because there are a couple games were close. Maybe you can sneak them into the playoffs, at least as a wild card, something like that. And of course, we just had Bill Lilly play the 72 Dolphins. He got them undefeated. Can you make that? And what does that feel like, I guess? So that's just, just some random stuff there.
No, it's that's the fun part, right? If you're a Dolphins fan, you can get them go undefeated. You feel really good about it. If you're a Bucks fan, you can get one win. It's like, yeah, I did better than McKay. And then that's just the point. I mean, you mentioned the Steelers. I remember in 2005, we were one playoff game away from an Eagles-Steelers Super Bowl, and my wife is a Steelers fan, so she's from Western PA. So we were thinking about, okay, what cheesesteak and pierogies for the game meal? Like, we were starting to plan it out, and then the Patriots came along and did their usual thing. It's like, oh well, that didn't happen. But yeah, it's we just want. It's more fun to play them out and see if we can do better. And even if you're 13-1 with the Dolphins, if you're 7-7, then you start going, wait a minute, something's wrong with the game engine, and that may be the case. One of the reasons I picked the 1960 NFL championship game, it's my very first fast drive football game, was, okay, Packers were a powerhouse. They lost one game that year. The Eagles lost 3. Let's test it with the game. How are the Packers unbeatable? And it turns out they weren't. We got a higher score in my game than in the NFL championship game, but the Eagles did beat the Packers, and I thought that was like kind of like, okay, this does work. The game was close, like I expected it to be, and the right team won as far as I was concerned, and the game felt good. So, like, then I started playing around with starting to do some other things. But yeah, that was my first test. It's like 1960s football is really hard to replicate because it's a totally different game.
That brings up 2 points. Sample size. For a designer is much different than the player. My sample size as a player is 1. I'm probably going to play that game 1 time, and that's what, the game kind of has to hit that mark then, right? And the other thing is historical knowledge of carding. One of our great football thinkers in APBA, Dave Urban, talks about having to card those 60s sets, those 50s sets, even, some of those, they go back to 40s single wing stuff. I mean, such a broad spectrum of styles and dynamics of the games. I just wonder your thoughts on sample size from the designer's aspect. When do you feel like you've got it dialed in? And would you agree or disagree that, for the player, it's really just going to be that one-time experience, that first experience? You can't make no second chance to make the first impression. And then your historical knowledge. I mean, you can have all the stats, but how do you incorporate your the sense of a single wing team versus the ground and pound 50s, 60s versus run and shoot of the 90s?
I've always been a sports stat junkie. I was never good at sports, but I've tried to find other ways to be involved in sports. I was actually the statistician for my high school football team for 3 years, and got to go to some practices and see some stuff and learn some lingo and learn why things happen long before the telestrator, right? Baseball, I've been an official scorer. I've done over 300 games in my career as a professional official scorer. So I've got, the scoring rules and all that stuff down. And I've always been interested in history. So I've read all kinds of stuff about the way the game used to be played. People find it hard to believe that games used to be 3-0 and people would call that a thriller. Sammy Baugh was the first guy to be able to throw forward passes. Everyone, what do you mean? No, what do you mean there was no forward pass? Now, if you look at old footage, if you can find it, it was rugby. That's where they got the rules from. So there's no forward passing in rugby. So they just kept playing until finally somebody said, well, what if we were allowed to throw the ball that way instead? And that was the moment that the game became football that we know. Previous to that, it was just a different type of rugby. Hockey was so much different. Teams were six to 8 guys, and the same guys played all 60 minutes. It was they used to have goalposts instead of nets. And there would be a goal judge that stood literally behind the goal to determine whether the puck went in. And then they move those people off the ice behind the glass, and they have a button. But I mean, the basketball. Wilt Chamberlain changed the way the game was played. The free throw lane was widened. The 3-second rule was put into play. Offensive goaltending was created. I mean, people talking about Michael Jordan being the greatest basketball player ever. Michael Jordan did not have 4 rule changes that changed the sport forever put in because of him. And he didn't have 5 different offensive statistical categories created as official stat categories, because the Sixers were keeping track of all that. Super stats guy Harvey Pollack was keeping track of all that. And the league finally said, well, if you're keeping track of it, we should. There were no offensive versus defensive rebounds. There were no block shots. There were no, there was a bunch of things that didn't exist. Wilt Chamberlain's presence got people thinking about, how many of these things does this guy have? And boy, we need to keep him away from the basket. And he can't touch the ball above the, that to me makes him the greatest basketball player of all time, because they literally changed so much about the game. So once you have all of that, hockey, basketball, football, baseball, you can start looking at the statistics of the period and start to see some trends. If you look at any rushing stats that are available back in the 30s and 40s, you can see how the game evolves. And then you have to try to, if you're going to rate those teams, you really have to know your stuff. because there's no forward passing. So you have a quarterback who pretty much just hands the ball off or runs every once in a while. It's pretty straightforward, but how effective is that? You've got statistics that can help you, and the statistics are so woefully incomplete from the early days that going beyond the 1940 is probably a pipe dream for many, unless you have access to box scores that you can do, which is what I did with the World Football League. I went through all the box scores in the sporting news to get all the stats so I could rate the teams officially. Well, unofficially, but rate them in an official way with every category. So I think as a designer, sample size is you have thousands of data points out there. You have more data than you need. And what you're trying to do as a designer is get the math right. If a guy hits 300, but your engine is such that he can never exceed 275, then the math is wrong. And if the math is wrong, the game is wrong. So it's that constant back and forth of, if I get the math right, then when I turn over the play testers, that's when you sit back and say, okay, guys, here's what I'm doing. Like with the F1 variant, for example, here's the rules I have. Play with these rules. Run 2 or 3 races with these rules. Don't do anything but that. And when you're done with those, as you race, make notes about what worked, what didn't work. But don't tell me until you're done with all 3 races and then give me feedback. Tell me, this doesn't work. This is stupid. This takes forever to resolve. And then we work on tweaking it down to whatever it is that you need. So for a designer, you have such a wealth of data and enough historical sources to go back to say, do I have it right? Do I have this sport correct? Does it flow the way the sport should flow? And then you have to hope that if you get the math correct, there's a baseline season, right? That you base all the math off of. And every rating after that just modifies that base, kind of like Al's chart. The right-hand column is, this is the column you use if everybody was in every category. From that, you can then say, how do I modify that one column back to get certain results cut out and change them to something else? And how do I go back one more column and change those results so that I really have 3 charts in one, all dictated by the stats? So it's just a matter of getting, if that last column is wrong, and I'm not saying that it is, but if there was a math error in that last column, none of it works. None of it, because this line that you use and off which the ratings are designed would be off. So that's our thing. Sample size for a game player. I do realize you never get a second chance to make a first impression, but nobody plays the game right the first time. Nobody. You've just read the rules, you're rolling the dice, you're reading the charts, you make mistakes. Or you have to go to a web page or to a Facebook page and go, hey, on that 4th down play that used up 45 seconds and I called timeout, I don't think I have time left, do I? And then you get all the answers coming in. No, you did that wrong. So nobody plays it right the first time. Nobody probably plays the game right the first 4 or 5 times. There's always those learning curve mistakes. I now know with fast drive football, on a kickoff, if you don't roll under 21, it's average field position. You don't have to look it up. It's automatic. And I'm learning some of the other things. My 3 interception game last night, interception, roll 6, okay, 5 or 6, boom, there's a 6, touchdown. Like you start to get the muscle memory. So I would say for someone looking for statistical accuracy or whether the game works, I'm saying that most games, you should play at least 10 to 20 times before passing a judgment, unless it's APBA basketball, in which the first 5 minutes you play it, you are dealing with the epitome of awful. But any other game, generally, I think if you give it 10 to 15, maybe 20 times playing it through, get a chance to get through all the questions, start to get a flow. I now have a flow not only of how I do things. I have a dice roller that I built in Excel for all this, but I also have a flow in how I record everything, which is important. Baseball has that flow of the score sheet. So as long as you get it in a routine, once you get in that routine of how I write everything down and how I report the scores and do pitching changes and stuff, then after about 15 or 20 games, you have a pretty good sense of whether the game is working for you or not. And then statistically, you need probably 40 or 50 games before you can sit down and say, you know what, I think this thing's broken. There are some games that have come out over the years. There was one, I can't remember the name of it, where the penalties, if you got a penalty, as a football game, you got a penalty, it was the team was penalized for its average number of yards per penalty that it had gotten during the year. Every time they had a penalty. Penalty against the offense was a 4.3 yard penalty. It's like, no. I understand over the course of the season, you will get the number, you'll get the counting number right, but you won't get the feel right. No, there's no such thing as a 4.3 yard penalty at midfield. There's not. So you have to be realistic in that aspect of saying, are the things right? My favorite one is double plays. Game players love to complain about, well, there's not enough double plays. Double plays are a play of opportunity. There has to be a runner at first, and the batter, there has to be less than 2 outs, and the batter has to hit a ground ball in the infield. 3 specific requirements that may never happen in a game, even if every batter reaches first. You just don't roll it. Or the guy comes up, Jim Rice has like 4 24s on his APBA card in 1980. He's a double play machine. If he's leading off an inning and you roll a 24, well, you rolled his number. Just wasn't anybody on base. He would have ended a double play if somebody had been on, but there wasn't. So it's that sort of, he would have struck out if, but he didn't. But you rolled the right number. It's just that the right pitcher was in that he didn't strike out against. So you rolled the strikeout number. You just don't have the strikeout to show for it. You rolled the single in APBA. You got it. The card produced a single. Oh yeah, but you were facing an A pitcher, which got wiped out. So it's that everything that happens is going to happen, but there's people out there, pitchers and stuff, APBA golf, the slice, history maker golf. Ooh, if you were a full gold putter, you'd make that putt, but you're not a full gold putter. So sorry. It's just the dice do weird things for you. And sometimes they'll give you 5 double plays in the game. And sometimes they will give you no double plays for 5 games in a row. Hard to say. But if you have again, it goes back to my original thing. If you have the math right, and it can happen, physically happen based on the dice, it's the percentage of it happening is built into your game. Over a long time, it will happen. The same guys may not be the ones hitting into all your double plays, but you should still get the same number of double plays when your season's over.
Interesting. Just to circle back really quickly to APBA basketball, there was a mid-90s version that supposedly played a little quicker, and both games had fast play rules. Had you had any experience with those, or you think just the game of basketball in general cannot be adequately
I played replay basketball. I did a little mini 1974-75 ABA replay, and fantastic. And it did. I got into the flow of that game, and I had my substitutions already mapped out on little cards, so I knew exactly when to change everybody out, and that was helpful. And the game flowed pretty well, and it has fast action cards, so flipping cards is much faster than grabbing dice, dropping them down, waiting for them to fall, grabbing it. So you saved a little time. It's just it was toward the end of the season. The playoffs had already been set. You're playing a lot of games between the Conquistadors and the Kentucky Colonels, or blowouts, or playing the 2 4th place teams from the divisions, and they're not going to the playoffs. I don't play 162 game season replays for one reason. I do not want to play 75% of my games between teams that are not going anywhere. That's not fun. So I usually do like 30 game seasons. It's a quick dash to the finish. 8 teams, 30 games. It's 120 games. It's a quick dash. You're done. I treat it like a college college season, basically. Play a 30-game conference schedule and be out of it.
Which is so cool that you've got like a fast drive football. So say, yeah, you play exactly. You don't want to, you know, I my first ever replay attempt, you read all those brochures. I did all these stats, and then you try to, the reality of playing the 79 NFL seasons, like, oh my God. You look at the, you know, the Saints. I mean, the Saints were a good team, 8-8. They could have gone either way. It's another favorite kind of what if there. But again, those 2-14 teams, stuff like that. It's just like I got to slog through that whole thing on top of getting to the good stuff. But that's where you can kind of hybridize, right? You can take fast drive football. I think Brian Davis had fast score football, where you just roll a couple times to get a score, and you can, you know, play the marquee games and then kind of do the fast play stuff on the rest.
Yeah, the danger to that, and I'm only speaking from a design standpoint, the danger of that is obviously if I'm playing APBA football for the full game or second season, but I'm using Al's game for the other, is that I don't have a match. Two different systems may give me different results. And so there's always that possibility that my 1980 Eagles playing full second season and playing their 16 games, finished 12-4. And yet the team over on Al's side that was, let's say the Raiders, don't even make the playoffs. They don't even get the mistake by the lake, you know, to get them into the Super Bowl. But I'll never know, because I played these games fast play and this one full play. I'll never know which was the right outcome. But you're right, a 256 game NFL season is just not something most people want to do.
What about weather effects in any sports? I mean, especially, you know, his second season, Keith's got a nice regional seasonal football chart for certain effects. I mean, then you get something really outrageous like the Fog Bowl, you know, the Eagles at Bears, right? I mean, something like that where you just cannot see what's going on. You've got, you know, heat effects, you know, is the Southern team really affected by wearing, you know, white jerseys and the visitors are stuck wearing dark? And is there, you know, some fatigue factor that we've talked about fatigue factors. Could you, you know, incorporate something like that? You talk about pitching fatigue. I mean, could that carry over to at least a couple of star players or key skill players, as it were? But weather effects in general, what is your take on, you know, incorporating them, and to what extent you make them a big part of a game, or, you know, on whatever basis, you know, X percentage of a given season?
Well, you'll notice that the games that I've designed, indoor soccer, indoor football, curling, all played indoors. Part of the reason is those sports are very underrepresented in terms of design. And usually, like with indoor football, they'll take an outdoor football game and then say, here's the modifications you make. I literally went and designed it using AFL stats and AFL procedures and processes. You can't play outdoor football with that game. So weather effects, I do not use. My players don't get injured. Why? Because I don't want to keep track of all that stuff. And in my designs, I don't really want to keep track of it for other people as well. The F1 variant does have to have weather, because you do have the issue with hot tracks and hotter weather. Certain tire compounds don't last as long. Like, you have to have it, but it's very simplified, very, 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 very simplified. And rain, of course, can enter into play. That means you have a different set of tires for that. So that's an exception, but it's very small, and each track has its own weather, and it's not a complicated system to use at all. But football, you know, it's like it's windy, and that means the passing grades get dropped, and it's also cold, so it means that the fumble rates go up for receivers, and it's for me, it's too much. Then when you do injuries, it's like, okay, this guy's out. How long is he out for? Oh, he's out for a quarter. Okay, and then you take him out for the quarter, and you're in the fourth quarter, and you're like, oh man, Lynn Swan could have been playing this whole time. You know, and it's too much. What I've done in baseball is I have what I call the enforced rest chart. I actually designed for my 30 game season. Each position has to take a 3-game series off. And each series in the middle of the season has 2 positions to take off. So if it's left field, third base, every left fielder and every third baseman in the league sits down and their replacements play for 3 games. So that the effect of their being gone affects a single series, not a random game here and there. So it could have playoff implications if it's against the right team, but every team has it. So if we're talking about a draft team that has, say, Mike Schmidt versus Elliot Maddox at third base, and Schmidt has to sit and Maddox has to sit, and Schmidt's backup is Rick Shue, and Elliot Maddox's backup is George Brett, there's a definite potential impact to the pennant race based on that forced rest. So, and I built it in such a way that it's somewhat realistic. Catchers miss the most time because they generally don't catch the full complement. Outfielders miss the least amount of time because they're generally, and the infielders are somewhere in between. So nobody plays the full 30 games. That's how I deal with injuries. It's just an enforced rest that I'm without, the teams without those players. Otherwise, you got to keep injury lists. You got to check them off every day. You got to, okay, this guy's still got 5 games left. It's an off day. So, oh, I forgot to deal with off days. Okay, I'll take another day. You have to have an infrastructure for how you're going to handle injuries. So I usually don't play with them in APBA or anything. Every draft league I've ever been in, we ignore the J ratings for the players. We just have usage. And it's not even at bats. It's like, okay, this guy can be used for 3 games. You pick the 3 games, we don't care. But at the end of 3 games, you have to take his card and put it in the league envelope. He's done for the year. Like, I don't knock the games that have that and went through the research process to figure all that out. I just don't use it. And I try not to put it in any of my games if I can, because I think a lot of people don't play with injuries. And I think if you read some of the things in play, in the play community, there's a lot of guys that you can tell they just don't use injuries at all, ever.
Interesting. Do you happen to ever dabble in wargaming?
Yes, massive wargamer.
All right, I was going to say because
that closet back there has tons of war games in it.
Nice. That's again
actually right over here in this corner of the thing, right over my shoulder, right there, is the corner of the map for Mr. Madison's War, War of 1812. Nice. So I store as many maps as I can in poster frames because most of the games I get are 1 map games or like 22 by 34 maps. So I put the maps in the poster frames and use them to decorate my office. Nice. I just got to say, when I want to play Mr. Madison's War, I pull it off the thing and lay it down, and then my map is ready to go.
There you go. That's quite sly. You can also make them into like placemats or something too, like, kind of protected, and that way your games are totally, and it's a decoration thing. Maybe your wife won't mind as much. So wargaming, I wonder that obviously you see right now, obviously the pandemic, even before the pandemic, as you said, gaming was, board gaming, we all knew was kind of on the up and up and up, and on the ascent, Ticket to Ride, things like that, a lot of card games, but the war games, the old venerable, the Avalon Hills, things like that, coming forward now to all these wonderful Worthington and DVG and God, I'm going to forget them all now. Compass and GMT. I mean, there's some incredible stuff out there that, some are doing some fast play kind of things. I just wonder if you've ever tried, if you've thought about tackling those and how, if you can kind of apply some of the same principles, certainly, performance statistics of say vehicles or weaponry with kind of, outcomes of I guess you're kind of, you've got orders of battle, you're bringing units in at certain periods of a battle, or you're setting up scenarios. I mean, it's kind of in that sport realm, not to be flip at all, but I just wonder if you've ever kind of looked at the over.
There's some overlap. I think I've learned how not to write a rule book from the wargaming community. A game I played for almost exclusively for like 15 years was Advanced Squad Leader, which has a 200 and some odd page rule book.
That's a
It
killer.
has all sorts of exceptions. Yeah, it's killer. But once you've read something like that, and then you get this little baby that's 4 pages long from Fast Drive Football, and people go, wow, 4 pages of rules. I'm like, this is the introduction to the first section of the Advanced Squad Leader rules, like not a big deal. So you learn how not to write rule books from wargaming, because there's always all of these exceptions. You know, this unit can do this, except if it's raining, or except if it's in Pacific Jungle Theater, or except if they're Bulgarian in 1945. Like, you start to realize that there's all these exceptions. And so in writing rules, you go through and say, okay, I wrote this rule. And you try to do stream of consciousness. Here's what I want the rule to say. Then you look at it and go, oh my God, now let's edit this down. And I try to write my rules more like bullet points than anything else. What you want to know when you're playing Fast Drive Football, I'll use that because it's the most recent game. What you want to know is, what do I do here? And Al's done a pretty good job of, this is what you do. You roll the dice, you look at this, you check that, then you come back over here and you get the result, and then here's what the results mean. I know guys who would take that rule book and it had been 15 pages long, because they would have tried to come up with every possibility and written them in as exceptions. Al's living rules have taken into account, look, I said this is how you play the game. And now questions have come up. So let me just add in red the stuff that I want to clarify. Eventually, he'll get to a 6 or 7 page rule book by the time all these clarifications are in. But by keeping it as simple as possible from the get-go, more people can get into the game and get started. And once they get started, then they can ask questions. Gee, that rule wasn't very clear. Or what happens if there's 1 tick left and I have a full inefficient offense? Does that mean I can't run a play? As it turns out, nope, you can't. You're out of time. No matter what you do, you're out of time. So, I think it's important I think if you play some more games, you get a sense of how in-depth and how complex a rule book can be. And it gives you a really good background as to what not to do when you're writing a sports game rule book. Because, a baseball game, well, Babe Ruth is left-handed, except on Tuesdays in Cleveland when he bats right-handed in the 3rd and 5th innings. There are none of those. It's a left-handed batter. Here's what happens with left-handed batters. All left-handed batters. It doesn't matter where they're at. Here's the chart changes for a right-handed batter. Here's what chart changes or non-changes for switch hitters. Like, it's super, super simple, and you just have to write it to acknowledge that. Running the tendency ratings that are buried in the offense and defense, the P+ and the R+. I missed that the first time I played, because I read it, but then it was like, I looked on the card real quick and I didn't see it. I wasn't looking in the header. So it's just a matter of, sometimes it's on us. Sometimes it's on us as the owner of the game to read every single word of the rules. And I always skim through the first, what am I getting into? What's this kind of look like? Oh, there's a time in the game, dots, dots, and timing chart. Then the second time through, it's read every single word from the introduction straight through the end credits, and make sure that I'm kind of thinking through, have the charts out in front of me. But it's on us to read the rules. Someone takes the time to write them, we need to read them. And what I find in wargaming, in sports gaming, is guys will on the question and you'll get the first 3 answers are, that's in the rule book. Here's the quote from the rules. It's on page 6 of the rule book. And it's kind of like, okay, guys, I understand you probably rushed through it and you think you want to get going and play right away. Read the rule book. The rule book should answer 95% of your questions before you ever ask them. And then you can save the questions for, gee, I read this 3 times and I don't see it. I don't understand it. Can I get some help here? Because you probably are running into people who have also had the same problem. It's really on us as designers to write clear, concise rule books. It's also on us as game players to do our homework and to read everything carefully and thoroughly, because it's there somewhere. And if it's not, then we have something that we can go to the designer and say, hey, you're missing that end of game scenario where I've got a tick left and this offense isn't inefficient, but I rolled a 6. What do I do? Like, and even then the answer might be there. It might just be in a different place than where you think it is. So yeah, very important. Yeah, there's not much from wargaming get translated into sports gaming other than how not to write rule books, because wargaming rule books are notorious for errors and misspellings and being complex. If you had to learn how to brush your teeth by reading an instruction manual written by a wargamer, you would still be standing 30 years later with a toothbrush in hand and toothpaste in the other and having no idea how to get the two together.
Well, then you get the berserker unit from a squad leader and just kind of come in and it doesn't matter.
It's always fun because they're the little red counters, right? It's like, I get to put the red counter on for the berserk guys. Yay!
There's that little extra, yeah. It's all their zombies, whatever. It's crazy. I always thought the early Avalon Hill games were pretty decent in their rules, but I have to go back and read them. I mean, I've probably played the games wrong, you're to 13 too, right? I mean,
well, when you're doing Gettysburg, right? It's like, okay, here's a little round top. It's rocky. Here's this spot. It's got woods in it. Here's a wheat field. And you got 3 or 4 terrain types. Your unit types are pretty much all the same. They're infantry, cavalry, or artillery. You start getting into a game like Advanced Squad Leader, where you're at the squad level, where a company may be made up of squads of varying troop strengths. Some guys are, have been in battle for a year and they're elite, they've gained elite status just from experience. And then you have this group over here that's part of that just came off the boat. And you try to represent those with counters, and you have individual machine guns and individual tanks, and they all have different characteristics. You start adding layer upon layer upon layer, in addition to, it's woods and it's forest and it's jungle and it's wheat fields and it's orchards and it's stone buildings and multi-hex stone buildings and multi-level stone buildings and multi-level wood. Like, you start adding all of that on there. Now you need a 225-page rule book to tell you how to handle all of that stuff and all of the good and bad things that can happen to you while you're in that wooden building taking cover. And sports games, fortunately, don't have that. Here's how you do a kickoff. Doesn't matter. Here's how you resolve a rebound in basketball. Doesn't matter. Here's how you resolve a play in fast drive football. Doesn't matter. There aren't a million exceptions for, well, if Washington is playing Cleveland in November, well, this process is completely different. And you have to go to page 39 to do that. You don't have that in sports gaming. It's almost every sports rule book I've seen has been anywhere from 1 to 5 pages. There's not much need for much beyond that.
But you could do it if you wanted to get that. The pitcher batter interaction, the ball coming in the 5 phases of the batter perceiving the ball. Do that.
There was a guy that was on Delphi that was advertising he was doing this game, and the rule book was like 86 pages. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, no. I never said a word. I wanted to. I really did. But again, it's that thing of when you have a design background and you see that somebody's kind of going to go off the rails, you have to sort of let them go off the rails, and the customer will tell you. And I think a lot of the guys are like, I wouldn't spend time reading an 87-page rule book on how to play a baseball game. I just wouldn't. So you get that if you're sharing, as Keith tries to share a little bit, but he found the same thing I did. If you share too much, then people are then feeling like, well, you're asking me for my input, so here's what I want you to do with the game. And then that's not usually the way that we're trying to do it. Is here's a peek at what we're doing. This is what we're doing. This isn't really for you to say, but I want you to do it this way. Keith has said it, Al has said it, I've said it. You design the game you want that you would play, and you hope people like the way you've done it. And if you're selling it, they will let you know. even if it's free, they will let you know. So it's just a matter of doing what's right, and just hanging in there for the most part.
For sure. Tell us, round us up a bit more on SherCo and what, how we find you and what you've got on offer, and a little more about what you've got planned. We start out there. It's probably a good way to close it out so people can find you and get into what you're doing there.
Okay, SherCo celebrated its 50th anniversary back in 2018. It is probably of the three. It used to be one of the big three. And I don't mean that to disparage the game. It's just that other games have come along and took over a niche that SherCo used to have. But it was one of the big three, and it's the third oldest currently produced baseball game. It's the only one where you can play in the actual stadiums. I think people who have owned the game understand it and know it. When we brought it back in 2016, it had been under license to another manufacturer. That licensing agreement ended. I actually contacted Steve LeShay just to ask if I could get permission to reproduce a booklet that he had sold back in the early 80s online for people who wanted it. Said, I don't think you sell this anymore. Could I please have permission to scan it and post it for free? I didn't want to make any money. And he went and looked up my website for my games, and he's like, I'll tell you what, why don't we work together to bring the game back? My licensing agreement expired. They weren't really doing a good job marketing it. What can you do? So we worked on it and kind of batted it back and forth. And I redesigned everything, redesigned all the rule books. They look different. All the stadiums we found to scale drawings that I was able to blow up in a certain size, to overlay a grid of a certain size, to be able to know exactly where all the squares should be in the park. And we noticed that there were some stadiums that, just by guessing over the years, were way wrong. The fences were not far enough out. So we went through all that process, new graphic look. And then I said to Steve, I said, you've only ever offered 2 seasons. The 1921 season, 1921 American League season, the 1927 American League season. I want to offer as many as we can. So we offered 7 to start with. I think it was like 1941, 1962, like some of the seasons that people like in their mind go, that's a season I want to play. So I had 7 seasons to start. By 2018, I had shared with Steve an idea that I had that was really from the baseball game I had been working on, about how pitching control could work differently and how we could re-rate the pitchers. And so we came up with SherCo Plus. Totally optional. People who already own SherCo don't have to have SherCo Plus. People who only want to play SherCo Plus don't have to go back and buy the original. 2 separate games, but they use the same basic fielding and mechanics, different result books. One's base 21, which means you read the lower die first. One's base 36, which you read like APBA, which is the red die first. So there's 2 different things and 2 totally different pitching systems. In SherCo Plus, every batter and pitcher has a walk strikeout rating. In SherCo Classic, only the pitcher has a walk strikeout rating. So we've changed some things. And so in doing that, I went back and I've got every season available in both formats from 1940 to 2020. So 81 seasons worth of stuff. We're fixing some of the old seasons. There was a mathematical error in the computation on the plus charts. Everything's off by 1 in walk strikeout ratings, but we send that to anybody who buys a set and says, here's how you can manually do that until we can fix it. So we've addressed that. It's been fun working with Steve. We've never met. We have never met each other. Everything was done through the internet or on the telephone. We've never even gone online to play a game against each other, but we've got this partnership working. And I think if you were to ask him, he'd say it went as well as he could have ever expected. I think he's really happy that he offers a wealth of seasons he never had before, which is a plus. I think he's super proud of the work that he did in getting SherCo Plus out, because he took a basic conceptual idea that I had and worked all the math out. And he, as he said, you really got my design juices going again. Like, it kicked me back into a design mode. So I think that was beneficial. If you want to know how to find us, you can look at SherCo Baseball 2016.wixsite.com/home. That's our official product website. And if you go to asggames.com, that is our official distributor. That's where you can buy the stuff. So if you want to know about the game and get it, there's some samples or some videos posted at the game website, walkthroughs, freebies, a history of the game, a little bit about Steve and myself, some old roster newsletters. We post them on the website. That's sort of like the game support website. And ASG is our actual, they do all the mailing of the PDF files for people to buy PDF versions. They print out all the printed versions and mail them to people, ship them to people. So, we have a good working relationship with them. George and Marianne at ASG are fantastic to work with. They're great people. Steve's been a joy to work with. It's been fun to bring that back. Because like I said, that was my first commercially produced game that I ever owned, and I sort of have an affinity for it. And who knew 40 years later that not only was I a game player, I was actually helping bring it back. I mean, I would have never, ever guessed that would happen to me. And so that's probably even though I've designed my own games, I think that's been my proudest moment, is that Steve saw something in what I did that told him this is a guy I can trust to get me back where I want to be. And I think I delivered for him in spades, and I'm super proud of that. That's and awesome. You have to, by the way, you do have to have a bit of an ego to be a game designer. You have to have the self-confidence to go, I have an idea, I'm going to put it out there. Because you can't be timid. If you're afraid people are going to think about you, you'll never put your design out there, because someone will trash it. Someone will call you egotistical, a show off, whatever. You just go, you know what? If that's how you feel, but you're right. There is a bit of showing off. But it's kind of like being a surgeon, right? You want your surgeon to be good, you want them to be confident, and you want them to do the job and do it well. And as the old saying goes, it ain't bragging if you can do it. So, those of us that have designed, Al now is a member of the design group. He has every right to crow about his design. And if people don't like that he crows about it, well, you know what? He did it. And as long as he did it, he gets to flex his muscles a little bit if he wants to, and take a few bows. That's perfectly fine, because nobody else did what he did. So, if you're first, you get to the victor, go to the spoils. But I think the game design community is very supportive of each other. I know I only met Keith once when he was in Chicago a couple of years ago for to demonstrate his basketball game. But we emailed for over the years off and on. He would bounce ideas off me. He sent me a couple of things to look at. I would bounce some ideas off him. Always supportive of each other. If Al ever wanted to pick my brain about something that he was considering for anything he's doing, I'd be happy to talk to him. Anybody, I don't mind sharing. What I do have a problem with, and I don't mean a problem like it's a problem, is when people say, Brien, tell me how you go through the process. Because it's not something you can teach. You kind of have to do it. You kind of have to come up with your own way of approaching the problem. And it's all based on what you have accumulated between your ears from all the things you've done in life that help you to approach problems. And so I can't teach Jeff Giordano how to design a variant for APBA football, because I don't know how your mind works. And yours, and to get on the same page, I can't teach you how to think, but you could probably come up with your own, because you'll have an idea, and once you get focused on it, you can go and execute it. And that's the way Keith Avalone is. It's the way Pete Ventura is at Replay. It's the way any designer is you get it in here and put it there, but you can't, to put it on paper to teach others, it's just not something that can be done. I wish I could. I'd put it all down in a book and sell it to people who want to design games, but it's just there's too much stuff that is just things I've learned over my life that just kind of pop in my head and go, I'll do it that way. And that just it's an in the moment thing.
it's very creative process. I mean, it's not unlike writing a book, a play, a movie, or an album or anything. I mean, you kind of have to have that innate sense, and you've got to do your homework and your apprenticeship, and it's just got to be something in you, right? I mean, it's
Yeah, I did a wacky races variant for red, white, and blue racing. And I was trying to think to myself, how do I get Dick Dastardly in this in a way that he can't really possibly win the game? Because in the whole series of 34 cartoons, he won once and was disqualified for cheating. How can I do that? How can I make Dick Dastardly be part of the game and an important part of the game without it being that he'll win? And I was downstairs in my basement and I was doing something totally unrelated, and I was cleaning off a shelf, and I pulled off the shelf Settlers of Catan. I was looking for something else. I wasn't even looking to play Settlers of Catan. I just pulled off the shelf and I went, I got it. Dick Dastardly behaves like the robber in Settlers of Catan and only comes onto the racetrack when activated by a certain result. And if he's challenged, he automatically leaves the track. And if he's in first place at the end of the race, just because that's the way it goes, you have to roll. And only if you roll double sixes can you win. But up until then, it's like, I can't figure out how to do this without really writing rules that would be 5 pages long as to how Dick Dastardly can't possibly win. And it's like, I got it. And once I had it, then I was able to finish the rules. And I even say in my design credits that I stole the idea for Dick Dastardly from Robber from Settlers of Catan. And sometimes that's how these things work. I mean, like Al was saying in his interview, I'm trying to figure out how to do this football game. Well, wait a minute. I've got Keith's thing that I can look at. And boy, what if I did it that way? Hey, your inspiration comes from people who've done just what you've been doing. And then it clicks in your head somewhere that I could do it just like that. And then you're off to the races.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, because that reminds me, there are folks we'd see in a newsroom, daily newspapers for a long time and other publications, but you see folks kind of like they act like they're maybe not working. Like, why is that reporter not writing? Why is that editor not designing? Or, but you're thinking constantly. It's like you may be spacey, like John Lennon might be on his couch, just not doing anything, but it's all kind of, everything's coming together somehow. And then, like you say, it's just that one last moment. There's all that thought process that's gone on, but it finally coalesces in this really unexpected way. So, I guess life lesson is just like kind of when people are, maybe certain folks like designers are, kind of looking around like they're maybe not, looking for the answer, and it's just not, that's how it kind of, that's the mystery of the process.
It is, and it can be fun. And I honestly, I don't know how many people watch your videos, but I would say to anybody, you can do what other people have done. What you need to do is just start thinking about what's a game I would like to play. And it's going to be that there are things that are an element of this game and an element of that game and a process for this game. And I like rolling D10s instead of D6s. And you are borrowing from other things, but then eventually it starts coming into, okay, I kind of know what kind of game I want to play. How do I get there? What stats do I have? What stats do I need? How many books do I need to read? If it's something that's going to be about intangibles and stuff, how do I research that? But you can do it. And then it's just a matter of getting in the hands of people who want to test it. And you have to get people who are interested in being honest with you, and you allowing them to be honest with you when you have an idea that is absolute garbage, and being able to say so. So you look for people and say, look, this is what I want. I need you to be honest in your assessment. I need you to challenge the rules you think are stupid, because maybe we're just not clicking mentally between ourselves. And once I explain what I'm doing, you go, oh, the rule works. Or you explain to me how that rule's never going to work because you've tried it. And you have to, it's a collaborative process. It's real hard to be the only person that does the design, writes the rules, develops the cards, develops the formula, play tests it, and then puts it out there you've had no outside input to say, you're barking up the wrong tree. I think anybody that's watching this video could do it if you want to. And there's plenty of design folks that would be happy to say, hey, I'll look at something. If you think that you need someone who's done this before to take a look at it, or you can ask questions. I never turn down questions. Like I said, what I can't do is, how do I get from point A to point B? I don't know. You have to get from point A to point B, but maybe I can give you a suggestion that pushes you along that path, but I can't tell you exactly how to get there. But maybe I can, be a way station halfway between. It kind of nudges you a little bit one way or the other, or maybe shoots down an idea and say, yeah, that's never going to work. Those are conversations to have, but it's where you do have to have an ego to do it, but you have to also be able to set that aside at a moment's notice when someone says, Brien, that rule for those red tires sucks, and we need to do something else. It's like, wow, I thought I had it. Okay, back to the drawing board. And you gotta do that. But I think anybody could do it if they really wanted to try. It takes a while, and you're not going to design a game in a week. It's not possible. Freddie Mercury may have written Crazy Little Thing Called Love in 10 minutes in a bathtub, but it's a 3-minute song. That's a hit or not a hit. When you design a game that's out there, especially if you're trying to sell it, and you want to sell 30 copies and call that a success, you're going to put more than 10 minutes in a bathtub of work into that just to get it to where people are going to go, hey, this is a good game. You should try it. Because the first guy that comes out and says, this is hot garbage, forget it. You won't sell your 20 games or 30 or 70 or whatever number you had in mind, because it gets trashed right away.
It's a discriminating crowd. It's good. It's a good personal test if you really want to go that route. Brien, this has been super.
It is. These guys know what they're talking about. I mean, they've played a lot of games, and if you don't listen to them, then you get everything you deserve.
Well said. Sir Brien, this has been absolutely inspirational, motivational, and hugely informative. Thank you so much. You've got me wanting to try.
Thanks for having me. Hey, like I said, SherCo Baseball 2016.wixsite.com/home, and ASG Games if you want to try it out. And it's PDF, so save on the shipping cost. I should push the printed product, but to be honest with you, with the pandemic and all this other stuff, PDFing and printing just what you need rather than get a big box of stuff that's heavy, and gosh, postage rates are crazy. I don't know how Keith does it. I didn't raise my rates on my games, Keith will say. How do you do it, dude? Because you got great service and those prices are crazy, but he keeps it affordable. So, so I appreciate you asking me to join you. This is the first time I've ever been interviewed by anybody in my entire life. So it's been fun.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think everyone's going to learn a lot from you. So appreciate it, and be well.
You too. Take care, and thanks for having me on. And guys, enjoy your gaming no matter what game you're playing, because there's nothing. Life is nice when you're rolling dice.